You just never know how technology is going to work. I was able to find the record button, hit it very easily this time. We've got some great pours lined up. Your boy Brandon's in the house. Brandon, you doing good?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a night where we're having some pours and I think some good conversation. And I think we should welcome in our guest. He's the founder and CEO of the Perfect Fifth, and we're going to be talking about one of their collections in the bourbon whiskey world. Let's welcome in Karl Schoen.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for letting us try some cool things, because it's not too often we get to try like these numbers that we're going to talk about on the age statements that are mixed in with other things, but not too often that are single barrels that have made quite a journey. So I'm excited. And Brandon, should we just hop into the first one and have an 11-year-old whiskey from that's known as Canongate with Perfect Fifth? If you look at the Canongate 11-year-old whiskey coming in at 123.2 proof. Karl, what can you tell us about this lovely pour?
Okay, so Canongate, the Canongate 11-year-old, it's whiskey that was distilled in Kentucky. We're calling it American whiskey. It is technically a bourbon mash bill. It was then, in its young years, sent over to Scotland to mature, and we bottled it at 11 years old. This is the first one. We actually owned 5 of these barrels. This was the first of the 5, and as you kind of touched on, it's something super unique. And when I was offered these barrels, I had to jump on them because I think there's maybe there's only a handful of other releases that have a similar backstory.
Yeah, I was gonna say you don't hear about getting something done in Kentucky or anywhere in America then shipped overseas. I know of one others that we've talked to that's named after a horse.
Absolutely.
But I'm excited to try these and I'm curious to learn more because, like you said, it's a different process, and I'm curious to see what that trip does.
Sure.
The nose is nice.
I will say this. There's a lot of flavor. Obviously, you can taste the flavor coming out in the age statement of it, but especially at 123 proof, normally that's going to really knock some taste buds out. But man, I get some really good depth of flavor on this.
I was worried you were going to say you were going to lose some chest hair or something.
Yeah, I have chest hair first to lose it.
Yes, I will jump in and say that it's definitely something that I picked up across, honestly, all of these barrels. They're all fairly high proof. We're doing everything at cask strength. And sometimes you had to double check and you're like, is that really, 123 proof? Because it doesn't, it's definitely there, but more on for lack of a better word, a spicier side of the proof, but doesn't hit you so hard in the back of the throat like you would expect 120 plus proof to be. That's for sure. So to really jump on a little bit, you asked earlier what makes it, I guess, what changes when it goes over to Scotland or across the pond to mature. So Kentucky maturation, as you guys know, you have a lot of volatility in the climate. It gets cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. So that, especially with that heat comes in, it's that goes in and out of the wood, and there's a lot of interplay with the wood, which also limits your ability to age long-term whiskey, right? Some of the older whiskeys that you see out there, stuff once you get, 15, 18, 20-year-old bourbons, at a certain point, those are taken down from wherever they are and put on the first floor of the rick house where it's nice and cool so they can age. In Scotland, you have much more of a mild climate, and it doesn't get that cold, as cold in Kentucky. It also doesn't get anywhere near as hot. So that kind of lends itself to, lets you age for longer, but it also takes longer to age. The best analogy that I've I guess kind of thought of in my head is if you have when you're cooking a steak, or a piece of meat, if you slow cooking it versus, putting it straight on, high broil or straight on a grill. You're going to have different, completely different end products. So that's kind of what, I kind of look at maturing in Kentucky versus maturing in Scotland. And another thing you can also see on it, and as we tried 11 and the 14 and the 15, there's definitely, you'll be surprised, there's not as much oak, you don't have a bad sense of oak that you would get necessarily from a lot of whiskeys. A lot of bourbons can't age for that long. We still have 2 more of these barrels from the same batch, that are still going strong over there in Scotland. So, yeah.
Well, I was gonna ask too, and the only reason I'm gonna ask this is I learned this literally on Friday when I was talking to one of our friends in a distillery, and they moved some barrels into kind of cold storage here or cooler storage because they were worried that at a certain point that barrel's gonna be empty, and so I'm guessing this allows you to, one, age it a little bit longer, but also keep the Angel share from going completely gone, right?
Correct. I mean, Angel share in Scotland is about averages 2 to 3% a year, which is obviously drastically, significantly less than in Kentucky. So Angel share is definitely a big part there, but it's also not just purely a volume game, right? Both on the ABV and the volume side. The different aging process, because it ages slower, you end up with a different product, which is what kind of makes it unique. And it definitely has a cool story, but it actually does produce a different liquid, which is you can't really replicate it in Kentucky.
No,
And
you can tell them, and again, you can tell a big difference in the taste when it comes to this because of the high proof, the age statement on it. You get, it's super smooth, super flavorful. Not saying that straight Kentucky bourbon at this age and this proof isn't and can be this smooth, but like you said, a lot of times when you get into that higher proof, that higher age statement, you can get a lot of oak, a lot of grassy notes, if you will, at some point if it's not done and cared for correctly. But I think it's really good.
I was
Thank
gonna say
you.
we noted this kind of before when we were talking. Like, if you actually look at it, it's a little lighter color than you would think of an 11, but that makes more sense when you said instead of going from the, you can't see it, but my hands are on the podcast. But instead of going from the really wide range of temps, you're keeping it more kind of in the guardrails, and it's very flavorful.
Yeah. Well done. So, how did you? So tell us. I guess tell for me, and for everybody that's listening, is what's your background? Where did you come? Where did this whole idea come about of like, you know what, I'm gonna start a whiskey company?
Sure. So I'm 26 now, but when I was just about 17 years old, I, along with a lot of people today and in the past, got interested with just the way, I grew up around whiskey. It was always around my house. My father, grandfather, everyone, it was always the drink on the table if there was something to be, if someone was drinking. So always growing up looking at the bottle, always curious, just on the back of the bottle, seeing who the master distiller was, and as little as I was, just trying to understand what I was actually looking at. And I grew up around it. And then when I was 17, I was curious about the process of how whiskey goes from a still to the bottle. What does that process look like? For one, I was just very fascinated with the whole thing, the idea of aging and how it, in theory goes up in value and in theory, gets better as it ages. There's not many things like that. Wine's probably the other example, but wine obviously has a lot more, it goes bad. I mean, it depends on the wine or, ages in the bottle. It's a completely different animal. And I don't know wine well, so I don't want to jump into that. Got fascinated with it, and I was able, to convince my family that we should go ahead and see what we can do in getting some barrels, right? I mean, really just blind jumped into it. Definitely did not know what we were doing. And, by the time I was 18, we owned, handful of barrels. We started off on the Scotch side, just because I grew up more around Scotch than bourbon. And that's what I jumped into. And one of the first things that I noticed and I did appreciate, me growing up and everything's on the internet today, everything is, you want to buy something, you go online. The whiskey industry is very much not like that. It's very interpersonal. You want to buy a barrel, you typically have to go and call somebody and, work your contacts and et cetera, which I definitely appreciated going into it, but it also is a barrier of entry. So I started buying some barrels. Then, we made the crucial mistake of, buying barrels before figuring out how to get into the marketplace. And then you learn about the 3 tiers the hard way. And all said and done, I actually ended up, our first import was about a month after Trump announced his initial tariffs on Scotch whiskey. So we got hit with that, which was nice. But we came in, and this was right after the lockdown started, which we were nervous about, but ended up being a very prosperous time for the industry. So we started off with that, and one of the things that the initial barrels that we got our hands on were definitely very crazy stuff for a new bottler to get involved in. With some 30, 40-year-old different single malts that we got our hands on, and we were able to bottle. So the idea was, we thought we had a good process at selecting and coming up with some really unique stuff. And from day one we had a very purist perspective, and we wanted to try to do as much as we can single barrel, be as transparent as possible. It's something that some brands and some are more than others, but I love the idea of being able to really tell everyone anything that we can. Sometimes obviously we're limited, but for the most part, we've been fairly transparent and try to keep it with his, you don't have this thing in Kentucky as much, but on the other side of the pond, they do have, they do add color sometimes and that kind of thing. So we're not, non-chill filtered, no color added, single barrel or single cast, depending on what we're working with, and that's what we started off with, and I'm proud to say that's definitely a core piece of the brand that we've kept all the way through. And that was, back in 2020. Fast forward, till today, we released, I think it's close to 10 single malts. We're up to, I guess, 7 different American whiskey / bourbons, all under the Canongate brand. And to kind of take a step back, the initial brand was the Perfect Fifth. That was what we started with. And then I got offered these barrels of American whiskey, the ones that we're drinking now, and we didn't have a marketing plan for it at all, but I knew I had to have them. So we tried them. We were blown away by what we had, and we grabbed them and we put it on the back burner and figured out, one day we'll market this. And about a year or two later, I was in Scotland with my brother. Both my brothers work with the business, and we were sitting there on a trip, and we were in an Airbnb on the Royal Mile, and the actual street we were on was called Canongate, and we were thinking about we want to release this whiskey. We don't want to go through the process of trying to create this whole new brand and whole whatever. We have our main brand, the Perfect Fifth. Let's leverage what we have and let's get this bottle because it's really good stuff. And trying to think about what we're going to call this brand. On the Perfect Fifth was a very thought out. We put a lot of effort. Overthought it like every other new brand. Overthinks every component of it, and then they end up pivoting 50 times, which we definitely went down that road. And we said, let's just come up with a quick name. We looked up and, the street was called Canongate. I'm like, not a bad name. Did a quick trademark search. It was available. So that's what we said. We settled on Canongate. We didn't give it much thought. It was just me and my brother on a business trip, and that's the street we were staying on, and that's what we called it. So we did that first release, and we didn't really have much of a vision at the time for the Canongate brand. We also released it at the time. There was a random single malt scotch that we had that, a Glen Tucker's 28-year-old, a brand that's typically not bottled outside of a blend. It was good stuff, but we said, we'll throw it in and kind of just have this like brand that didn't have any, really just the odd one out was really what was going into it. Once we released those, we got a lot of good feedback, and we had a couple of these barrels that we still had other ones, so we continued to release. We did the 14-year-old and the 15-year-old, and about a year and a half ago, before we released the 15-year-old, let me take a step back. Even before then, we were slowly buying up some barrels throughout Kentucky, because I about 2 years ago kind of realized, given the tremendous challenges we were having in supply on the single malt Scotch side, and 8B is we're also based in the States, to really, take a closer look at bourbon. I made my first trip to Frankfort, Kentucky about 2.5 years ago, and we started buying some barrels. Obviously, things got crazy on the barrel market then, and they settled down a little bit now. But we slowly started buying up barrels, from across the board, different ryes, different bourbons, Kentucky. Obviously, like everyone else, we had to buy some Indiana because why not? And from there, about a year and a half ago, we kind of had the vision to really focus a lot more on the American whiskey side. So whether that be bourbons, American blends, etc. And that's kind of how the real fun story of Canongate.
Well, I love that, and it's coming out, and because of what you're doing, you're getting some unique flavors, some unique pours, and Brandon, do we just want to go to the pour two and then ask some more questions, or do you got a
I'm
question
in.
read up?
No, I'm in.
All right, let's
I
go
could
to
roll
the,
all my stuff into it.
and correct me if I'm wrong. On this one, all these are from the same original batch,
Correct.
but each coming in being bottled at a different point. So the 11 year was released in 2020, and then the 14 year in 23.
Yeah. So one thing to clarify: when we write the bottling date, we write the date that we actually put it inside a tote, right? When we stop the aging process, put it in a tote. It was in a tote for some time before we actually bottled it. So, not that the age statement's older, but we didn't actually release it in 2020.
Okay.
That's why there's actually an uneven discrepancy between the years. By the time because what happens as you talk, when you try whiskey, and it's good and you like it. If you want to just make sure that it stays good, you just end the process right there and then stabilize it and put it inside a tote, and then you're good to go in terms of where you tried it and where it's going to end up in the bottle.
So now the 14 year, it comes in at a slightly higher proof. The 11 year was a little over 123. This one, if I can do my math correct, is about 128.8, I think, proof, 64.4 ABV. So what can you tell us about the 14 year?
So the 14-year-old is definitely has the extra years on it, but out of all three of them, I think it's definite. I think it may be up there in terms of you definitely get a little bit more of the proof on it, in my opinion.
Again, a good nose. Very good nose. For the proof, the nose isn't. Neither one of these have been like ethanol forward or anything like that. They've been what I would consider a traditional whiskey bourbon nose.
That's. I'm going out on a limb here. Going out on a limb here, but it's smoother than the 11-year-old. I know that most people are like, yeah, sure it is, because it's 14 year versus 11 year. But this is 129 proof versus 123 proof, so there's a lot of times where you can get just straight fireball. But with this, and I think that just goes well with how you guys are doing it, like how you guys are doing the aging, the whole process of it. Like, I think correct me if I'm wrong. Is it 3 years in Kentucky? Or is it 3 year Kentucky and then it goes over there after around 3 years or so? Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, that initial batch I've worked on for years and explored the idea of actually doing a larger,
Right.
ourselves. The real challenge is that you can't, and people have broken the rules and you probably can get away with it, but technically speaking, according to the shipping rules, I'm not sure if it's the UN, but because there's some weird regulations, but what the container that you're actually allowed to ship whiskey in, it cannot be shipped inside an actual barrel. So the challenge really comes up is how do you ship it without ruining the single barrel component of it. So one of the things that I have worked on is literally putting each barrel into individual totes, and we're actually probably going to be doing later this year our first shipment of stuff from Kentucky over to the other side. And the other funny and interesting point, and I learned this not the hard way, but I learned this by accident. It's technically illegal to mature non-Scotch whiskey in Scotland. And I learned this because, going into, especially early on, anytime we had a label created, over here we had the TTB, but you don't have to get approved by the other side, but you definitely have to be compliant. So I had a contact that worked in the legal department of the Scotch Whisky Association, which was, I guess they're kind of an NGO, but they're effectively the governing body and they're the lobbyists of the industry. And if you infringe on the Scotch trademark, they're the ones that are going to come after you. So I reached, whenever we had a label or initial release, I would send them the labels. So I sent him this label. I had no idea it was against the rules. I'm also maturing it in a facility, and no one ever mentioned anything to me about it. And he said, label looks good, just like FYI. It's illegal to mature this stuff in Scotland. They have a lot of regs, and they're very, very strict on that kind of thing. Apparently not so strict. So, which is, funny, but I mean, we still have two other barrels. They're somewhere in the United Kingdom. But yeah, it's one of those weird rules that they didn't care. He didn't make a big deal about it, and he wasn't going to penalize or come after us. But it was a technicality that we were, definitely infringing on. So that was that. But we are working on getting some barrels over there, and the idea would be to get these small, 40, 50 gallon or totes, or I guess barrels, plastic barrels that we are able to ship, and then ship the corresponding wood fully assembled along with it. Just it can't be together in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and you told us that you told us like why the whole process and the whole brains behind taking Kentucky barrels and then moving it to Scotland because of the weather and the way that it plays with the wood and all that. But is there other reasons behind that? Like I don't know, do you have ties to Scotland, or is that just something that you're just outsmarting everybody else, including John and I, about like, man, this is a completely different process and maturity, like, because everything that I've had so far has been fantastic, and it's not, and you're getting, and the thing about Kentucky straight bourbon is that once you get higher in age, as everybody knows, is that it's harder to get it not taste like wood, right? That's the whole process. But with this, and I guess that's why Scotch is, Scotch has the most, I guess, the highest age whiskeys in the world, because you never see a 30-year-old bourbon. You never see a 20 or 40-year-old bourbon, just because it's just going to taste like just straight wood, termites, basically. But I mean, you have like what? Do you have ties over there? Do you have family over there? Do you or how did that all come to be about? Like, all right, Scotland.
So the whole, my whole career in this space and the whole brand really started off in Scotch whiskey, not on the bourbon side. So that's, that's our ties. I mean, that's where we started off. We have a good, network over there. But to really answer, I guess, the initial question, one of the things that we are working on is it doesn't have to technically go over to Europe or, to get the same effect. In America, we have a lot of different states, a lot of different climates, and there's no reason why we can't store barrels and get a similar effect if you store it, in a northern state. Whether in the Pacific Northwest or wherever. So you definitely can get the same effect, and there's nothing, I would say, proprietary to the air in Scotland, contrary to what I'm sure a lot of those brands will try to tell you. Yeah, I mean, that's what I would say with that. The other motivation I would say for us as well is really when we distribute going forward to have some European releases as well, European only releases. That is also motivation, just to have the stuff over there as opposed to starting out from over here. But there is nothing specific to Scotland, and I'm not the only brand that's bottled stuff like this. As you guys mentioned, Never Say Die, their entire brand is based on that. Great whiskey, by the way. I'm sure, as you guys have encountered, really, really, really impressed with their stuff. But there's been other brands across the way before us, a lot older, a lot more experienced than us, that have also released stuff that have matured on both ends of it. So I wouldn't, it's probably going to be substantially easier and cheaper to do it in America, but there is something to the story of it. There is a special relationship that we have on the story side. We do have a special relationship with both just as country to country with the UK and us, but also from a whiskey side. Majority of barrels, the majority of the wood that starts off in bourbon ends up in Scotland. I don't know if it's 90%, but a huge portion of single malt Scotch whiskey gets matured in ex-bourbon barrels. So there's definitely, there's a historical relationship there.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, and what's it like, to kind of source, you talked about kind of, in a sense, you kind of went in it backwards. You kind of bought the barrels and realized, oh, there's a lot of legal hoops in the U.S. For those that listen to the show, maybe you figured out, I've touched upon that. It's 2-3 years to figure out how in the world sometimes to get a brand up and launched in the U.S. because of all the legal hoops you got to go through. So what's it been like to, one, kind of go through that now once, kind of maybe backwards into it, but two, to now be sourcing in Kentucky and in the U.S. like that to kind of find these barrels?
When you start off, you're very limited in your network and you kind of have to break through. I would say definitely on the Scottish side, everyone's a little bit closer to the chest. It's a lot more secretive, for lack of a better word. On the Kentucky side, I will say my experience in the industry has been awesome. People that you would think would be your competitor are some of the nicest, most helpful people out there. Really, truly, the industry has been very just helpful. People are happy to help. There's room for everyone, effectively, I guess, what kind of people believe. And, and you've seen it when the the big warehouse, whether Jim Beam or the other, or Heaven Hill, when their warehouse is burnt down, they to keep brand continuity, their competitors sold them whiskey, and I think that says a lot about the industry. Sourcing on the other side is definitely it's a lot older of an industry. Bourbon has really taken off in the past 20 years. Scotch has been around for a lot longer. So that means also that people have been in it for a lot longer and have much, longer relationships, and it's definitely harder to break through. But yeah, that's the...
Well, and two, you talk about that, and at the beginning you kind of mentioned too as folks may or may not know, some places where you buy the whiskey from, you get hit with an NDA that you're not allowed to disclose too much. Some let you, some are wide open, some are not. And for y'all, you at least tell us where to look, and then if you're smart enough to maybe figure out where to get it, the pinpoint, you might be able to, because you put on there Bardstown for several of these. What's it like to kind of have that transparency? Because I think you mentioned it, that's something you want to do, but not, like you said, you're not always allowed to do it as much as maybe you would like. So what's it nice to kind of get up to maybe that edge and maybe touch the line a little bit?
Sure. So one thing I'll start off with, on the Scotch side, the default in America is you need permission to list who the brand is, not the other way, whereas in Scotland, the default is you're allowed to write where it comes from, unless the contract or unless the barrel was sold with that, exception. Obviously this being from Bardstown 15 plus years ago, there's not many distilleries that would have been able to produce this down there. So we can all take a nice wild guess. If you say Bardstown in the past 5 years, it's really, you have a 50-50 shot of guessing where it's from. But it's anyways. So we do have that. It's definitely a lot, from being transparent, dealing with the Scottish whiskey, it's a lot easier. I don't know. There's only one whiskey that we weren't able to put. Well, we're not able to put the brand name because there's a concept in Scotland called teaspooning, where distilleries, when they sell off their casks, will go ahead and take whiskey from another distillery and put a drop into it, and that will no longer be called, single malt. In this case, for example, in bourbon, you couldn't call it, if you took 5-year-old Bardstown Bourbon Company juice and you put in, a teaspoon of Green River, you couldn't call it, I guess maybe now you can, because I don't know if they're the same distillery or not, but you can't call it straight Kentucky bourbon or whatever the moniker would be. So same thing over there. That's the way they used to actually physically teaspoon it. Today they're allowed to just administratively teaspoon it. But what a lot of brands have almost created is there's a brand name for the teaspooned whiskey. So in this case, the distillery that it was produced on was called Balvenie, but there's a brand name called Burnside, which is anything it's teaspoon Balvenie with a whiskey from a Glenfiddich, which is another distillery that they own. We actually didn't call that. We called it Two Sisters, but that's the one example where we couldn't actually be. I mean, it's transparent, but we couldn't actually put the name of where it came from. Otherwise, we were able to write distilled at Springbank or distilled at whatever distillery it's from. On the U.S. side, for example, on the Canongate, we actually did reach out to the distillery to kind of ask, like, hey, would you guys even care, kind of thing. And let's put it like this: we're a lot smaller than they are, and I doubt they would actually come after us. But everyone's been good to us. I'm not here to step on anybody's toes. So definitely being transparent. We're doing our best, and sometimes if I'm sure they'll be coming to a point we'll have a whiskey that will have more than one distillery in the region, and that'll put us in a tougher position. But we're doing our best, and I will end off, which is I understand the general idea of why brands care. But if you're a larger brand producing, 1,000, 2,000 barrels a day, and a brand like us who's really just trying to put out a really cool and unique expression, in my head, it definitely doesn't hurt. I would even argue, if in person, to say that it enhances the value of the brand. And, really, for someone that loves a distillery, if you love Buffalo Trace, to be able to have like a cool, unique expression that you can't get typically, that's a fun thing.
I was going to say, the spotlight went out. He started talking about things he shouldn't be talking about, and that was the end of Karl. No, no, but I love that, and we talk about that, and as we've gotten to know a lot of brands, they're like, we know most likely where it's from or whatever, but and also sometimes for y'all with actually getting the barrels, it's a little easier to kind of figure some things out. When it hits a tote and you buy it that way, it's kind of anyone's game. So we did the 11, we did the 14. Brandon, you ready for a 15-year-old pour?
I've already poured it.
Oh, okay. So you're ahead of me. So we got the 15-year-old single barrel. This one comes in at, I don't know why I went very southern there. I've been around my daughter making accents all day. Coming in.
Been around me.
That's true too. That is true. You are from.
I mean, you are.
Kentucky.
You. First of all, you are from West Virginia.
I'm from above the Mason-Dixon line. That's totally different.
West Virginia, man.
That is true. Coming in at about 127 proof. Karl, what can you tell us about this 15-year-old?
So I would say the first two 11 and 14-year-old are much more what you would expect out of a bourbon. I would say this one starts to get a little bit more unique, not crazy at all, definitely a little bit more color. And yeah, so definitely a unique expression from it. And I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to think and how you compare and contrast the other two with this.
So to Brandon's point, I haven't really sniffed or done the smell test and all that. The 11-year-old kind of burnt. I don't want to say burnt. You felt it a little deeper in the chest. The 14-year-old kind of didn't go super far and kind of maybe had a little more of a flavor burst. I'm curious on this one.
So you get a little bit. Now again, this just could be me, but I haven't let it opened up a little bit. But off the nose, you get just a little bit more of the ethanol smell. But it's not a bad thing because it's like, I'm smelling 15-year-old bourbon at 127 proof or 100 whiskey, American whiskey. Sorry. But I think the flavor is completely there, and I would put it. Hold on.
I was gonna say this is the first time that you start to get that little bit of ethanol because you didn't get it on the 11 or the 14, which goes to show you how that aging process of going across the sea has kind of.
It does have a
little different.
It does have a more unique flavor profile than the 14-year. But I don't necessarily think it's bad. Do I prefer the 14-year more to the 15-year? I actually do. But I think this is good, like with all intents and purposes.
Yeah, that's a totally different, like you said, Karl. That's
really different.
Like I said, the 11, like I said, it kind of went down the chest. The 14 kind of went maybe a little bit. This one just stayed, to me, all up here, and had a lot, almost, I don't want to say completely different profile, but maybe a 90-degree turn or something. It's that is wild. This is where you find out. To me, this is a fun one because you get to try a barrel that has, or obviously they are single barrels and you just never know what may happen in it. But how just going 3 years, 4 year, then another year passed on another one, how different things can be in just that 1 year makes on that barrel, and this is a fun experiment.
Yeah,
we don't get to do that.
I mean, that's really I really think that's what a independent bottler such as ourselves. That's what I strive to really bring to the marketplace and to bring to the consumers is a unique expression, right? You still want to try whatever you're trying. You still want to try bourbon. People are, or single malt, whatever it is. But the ability to just get like a cool, unique single barrel, that's really what we're striving to do. We're not if you have a big brand and you're a distillery and you're producing whiskey, you kind of want to go after consistency. That's kind of what that's your game is, right? You have your core consumer, etc. Our entire philosophy is us and other independent bottlers is the entire other way around is to, consistency is not what we care about. We try consistency and quality. I kind of like to look at it as, I do believe good whiskey is objective, great whiskey is subjective. So that, kind of following along that line. So, so far I'm proud to say we've never released a bad whiskey. It sounds kind of dumb, but it's when you look at the industry, how many brands that they blow up, and then all of a sudden they have a bad one, and then every guy that loves whiskey all of a sudden writes them off. I can think of 10 bourbon companies off the top of my head that have done that exact same thing, and we try really hard to not to just really put out what we feel is good whiskey, and some you may think are some of your favorites. Some they're good, they're just not great, But we do a really good job at that, I believe. And the other point I would also mention is our flexibility, right? When you're dealing with one distillery or one source, then you're limited to that, and we can really go across the board. We're doing, the other releases of Canongate that we just came out with. We had some non-single barrels, so we did a small blend. And keep in mind, when I say blend, I think this case it was give or take 1,000 bottles, and we don't necessarily take an entire barrel and throw it into the blend and do the ratio like that. We'll take portions of a barrel to be put into the blend. It won't always line up perfectly, so we'll have some extras from different components. We put out some rye, both vatted and single barrel rye, and kind of really just whichever direction, whenever we come across unique barrels, really tap into that. The other thing that's unique about our sourcing process is we don't really buy barrels by the bulk. There's only been, I think, 1 or 2 times that and I typically regret it when I don't try it beforehand. So we really want to try samples every time, and not just a generic sample, but really samples of each and every barrel. And obviously that affects a lot of barrels don't have samples on the market. B is that obviously increases cost, because if someone's trying to push a lot of 100 barrels, they're not going to let you cherry pick through those barrels. We are definitely limited by that, but it also enables us to really just, when we have all of our different barrels and casks aging in the background, I don't have to worry about what's good or what's not. Obviously, we have to keep our eyes on it and continuously sample to make sure it's where it needs to be. But beyond that, we're quite happy with the selection we have, and pretty much every barrel that we own can either be blended, but it is also good enough to stand on its own as a single barrel. And because vast majority of the releases we have put out have been single barrel. But there is something that's nice sometimes about a blend as well. There's a different story you can tell with the blend. There's definitely, as a non-distillery, there's a lot more we can get very creative with the blend.
Absolutely. So, in some of our favorite and even some of the best around are blended barrels or blended whiskey or the blended bourbons or whatever.
They're taking that Scottish, Irish whiskey approach to the American whiskey game.
Correct. Yeah. And so where are you guys? I don't think we've covered this part of it, but where are you guys currently? Basically, I'll make it twofold. Where are you guys currently at now, like operationally, like where you're based out of? And then is there any plans to do anything, more concrete? Say, hey, opening up a distillery in Kentucky, doing those type of things. Is there anything in the works in that regard?
So yes, so I'm based in New York. I live in New York. I'm in Kentucky about 2 weeks out of the month, because about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, we purchased a piece of land in Shelby County, and we are building. We're not going distillery. That may be a future plan. It is definitely an aspiration, but it's not something that not something we're going into it head first day one. What we're getting into is we have about 170 acres there to play with, and we're getting involved. Being an independent bottler, right? Up until now we've always stored our barrels at third-party facilities, used third-party facilities for bottling. So I really, I know where a lot of the issues are and what's been a real pain for us to deal with. So we're creating a warehousing, bottling, and barrel picking experience, all kind of geared towards smaller brands. Our bottling line is going to be geared towards single barrel bottlings or small batch. We're not going the full large scale automation. I think that's really where the niche is, and that's kind of where we have a lot of experience on the other end, and kind of taking the feedback that we've given and the real issues that we've had. So to jump a little bit more into that, on the barrel picking experience, kind of the placeholder name we have for it is we're building a really nice but intimate tasting room and tasting facility where you can come in and actually go from nothing to trying different barrels, not limited to our distillery, because we're not going to have a major distillery at the time, but really just try to bring the independent bottling idea, but take it up one level in terms of the actual tiers, but on the barrel basis. You could come and try different barrels, whether you're a brand, just to provide bottling, or whether you're a retail shop that wants to do some single barrel bottlings, or lastly, if you're just a consumer that wants to, buy a barrel for whatever reason and actually get it bottled, etc. We designed a pretty cool warehouse where it's horizontal storage like a rick house, but we can get any barrel out, down, ready to go within 5 minutes. So that's what really lends itself to the facility. So, coming in, making an appointment, going through, kind of looking at a menu saying, hey, I want to try this, and we can actually get those barrels down. It's not something, a lot of times when you go into a barrel pick at a distillery, you're limited to that distillery, but even more so, you're limited to whatever 5 or 10 barrels they've already, they've put out, because, they've got a lot of barrels. Our idea is to kind of really get barrels from all over the country. Obviously start off with Kentucky, but moving on beyond that, not necessarily just bourbon, whatever we can have in there, and have a really diverse collection of barrels for people to come in and actually do barrel picks. And then obviously we'll move all of our, internal bottling operations there, and our maturation, what we can. Unfortunately on the Scotch, any Scotch stuff that we have has to be aged there as well. So bourbon and American whiskey does not have to be aged. I've read the rule of the law. You don't have to age it in. I don't think you have to age Kentucky whiskey in Kentucky to call it Kentucky. It
has to start there.
It's got to start there. That's it. So I'm not sure if it has to be like one day in a barrel there. I presume it does, but once that day passes, you can take it technically wherever you want and still call it Kentucky bourbon. That's not the case for single malt Scotch. You got to do the full. You have to bottle it there even. You can't even ship it out in totes. So we're definitely limited on that. We won't be able to necessarily have single malt Scotch barrels in our facility, but to really have that diverse, really diverse selection of barrels on site. And then beyond that, I've definitely gone full on in exploring the distilling game, and it's definitely a aspiration, but I'll definitely not go beyond that at this point, because we're not there yet. And the last thing we're also working on is, I've already started up a test facility. We're hopefully going to do this on a larger scale, is a barley malting facility on site. So there's, I think, only maybe one or two other small facilities in Kentucky that produce malted barley. The rest comes from either out of the state or out of the country. And it's kind of like the last piece of the puzzle for distilleries to really be able to say 100% from Kentucky, because everything else you can kind of do there. And there's a whole reason why barley isn't really grown in Kentucky yet. It is on a small scale. There's no reason why it can't, but just corn is the dominant crop. So we are working on that, and we're going to have hopefully in the next little while, we'll be opening up a floor malting barley facility in, on site as well.
Sounds like some cool things that are coming along here. And you talked about some of the other things that you guys are able to release. You've got the kind of the signature collections, which are those Scottish whiskies. I think you have the Oran collection as well. Oran collection. And even in the Canongate, you have the straight rye, and then your first blended straight whiskey, which I believe is Kentucky and Indiana. So especially on the Canongate, what's it like future release wise? Clearly you've got 2 more barrels of this that we're trying that are continuing to age. So what can you tell us there are future releases, and then obviously for folks that may be curious about the signature and the Oran collection?
Sure. So for starters, one of the things, as you can kind of see, is especially with Canongate, we're kind of going everywhere with it. We have single barrels that, with the crazy story being matured in Scotland, and then we have some blended American whiskey, then we have some single barrels and non-single barrels kind of going around the place. And that's one thing I could promise you is we'll never change. We'll never have a set direction. It's kind of, what comes across our plate, what do we get our hands on, etc. Up until now, on the supply market, it was very tight up until about 12 months ago. Obviously, as everybody knows, the bourbon barrel market has really softened tremendously, which is great for a brand like us, because that really, before it was hard to get anything besides a 6-year-old MGP. Now that's, we're buying 10-year-old whiskey from Kentucky distilleries that have been around for a while. So hopefully to see some more interesting older Kentucky whiskey. Also, look out for some whiskey that's not necessarily going to be Kentucky bourbon. Definitely from out of state, and not going to be from Indiana either. So stuff like that. And definitely on the blending side, we're very excited about that, because, definitely expect to see a lot more, random blends thrown in as we see fit.
I like to hear that you're going maybe, who knows, maybe down to Texas, maybe to Washington, maybe up to New York, Maryland. I don't know. There's a lot of states that, Brandon, you and I just did the Boozy 8. There's a lot of states
Yeah.
making some good stuff.
Oh, absolutely. You know, Kentucky's the mecca, but there's some other states that are doing some really good things. Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, but Kentucky's it. So my favorite question, and it's obviously more reflective to the people. So, can you tell us price point on the three, especially the three products that we had tonight, the 11-year, the 14-year, the 15-year. Can you let us know the price point? We know that you guys aren't your own standalone distillery. We know that you're in that super niche. I would say, well, I don't want to call you guys craft, but you guys are doing something very, very unique that a lot of folks aren't doing. There's a few, but you guys are doing something different, I think, in my mind. But
Sure.
hit us with the price point of what the folks can see it. Can they buy it online? Can we buy it in the store? Where distribution is? Things of that nature.
Sure. So obviously, because these are all single barrels,
Correct.
we're not many places. We distribute in California, New York, and New Jersey, but online, on our website and other sites as well, you can. I think it's 48 states or whatever the number is. It's pretty easily accessible. The 11-year-old, I believe, is already, it's sold out. We may have a couple of handful of bottles. There may be some stores out there that have. The 15 and 14-year-old are both the actual, I believe the retail price is $175. They're the same for each. There is one thing I want to be, but it's not actually the same, because what we actually did is we moved over all of our stuff to 70 CL or 700 ml, because that's what we do on the Scottish side. Because, selling in both, in America, you now can do 750 or 700, but in Europe, you still can only do 700. So we had to, initially we've done split bottlings, but it's just really not cost effective, and it really just kills us. And eventually the actual price. So they're both 175 retail, but the 15-year-old is in a 700 ml, not a 750.
Still though, 14 and a 15-year brand, we have tried and reviewed 6 and 7-year-olds that hit that price, not a 14 and a 15. So how do you keep the price? I mean, I guess not how, but why keep it somewhat approachable? Because I feel like this is a premium space product, and it is at premium prices, but it's not so astronomical that you wouldn't go, oh man, that's a 15 for 300 and some odd dollars. No, it's a 15 for $175, and all of a sudden that becomes much more approachable to me for that age range.
Sure. So one thing that we actually learned pretty early on, especially when releasing more unique stuff and not having a good comp or a good way to price it, we've made the mistake of, buying too high and selling too high. And that was a couple years ago. And ever since then, we've tried very hard to just be very careful, have in mind when we buy something, really what it's going to end up on the shelf at. And then obviously as a brand, as we grew and as we understood, as you mentioned, it not only does it take 2 or 3 years to get from concept to be on the shelf, but even more so price point, between moving through all the 3 tiers, it's everyone takes a cut of it. So, the price definitely shoots up. So really just keeping disciplined on our supply side. But we've made that mistake of releasing things that were too high. And we're trying very hard. Even the other releases, the 5 and 6-year-old, were 50, 60, 70 bucks a bottle, depending on what we're talking about. Really trying to just stay in that range where you can have something cool, but not have to pay for it. There's, as you mentioned, I'm sure we could have technically priced it higher, but our brand is, definitely, we're in it for the long haul, and we're really trying our best to really keep it. I wouldn't call it affordable. 175 is still a decent amount for a bottle, but for what it is, it's not.
I mean, we're talking about a 14-year, 15-year that has spent 3 years here, 11 years in a whole nother continent, not country, not just a country. You didn't go to Canada or Mexico. It went across an ocean, came back across. I mean, that's what I mean. Like that price point. The one reason it's one of Brandon's favorite questions is because, there are some brands, like I said, that are 6, 7 year olds that are going at your price point that didn't even do nearly what you guys were able to do with this stuff.
100%.
And it's commendable on the price.
Yeah.
And I love to see that 5, 6, those younger ones kind of match the price point. The scale kind of slides with it. And I feel like that's a good way to get people in to try stuff, and then maybe come up to these higher price points and be really wild.
Correct. And we've seen the same age stated bourbon, or even just straight American whiskeys, or bourbon, if you will, in other states, but that are double this price at this age stated. Like, we've seen it, and now you guys could have definitely went just astronomical on price, and again, yes, don't get me wrong, 175, 170 bucks, whatever. That's a lot of money for a bottle of bourbon. But you're not paying attention, and you're not watching our show or whatever you're doing, and not sipping on this if you're not interested, and maybe want to take a splurge every now and again. Because we've all done it. We've all seen stuff on the shelf, and like, probably shouldn't be buying that, but guess what? I'm going to.
Yeah.
There's
something like coming across a brand of bourbon that you haven't seen, and it's just like you got to try it, not because it's good, because you have no idea what it is.
Exactly, 100%. And this is the type of stuff that you're not going to be. This is not your everyday drinker. This is not stuff you're mixing with Coke, whatever it is, or putting in a cocktail. Like, I hope you're not, but this is stuff you're drinking on special occasions, birthdays, weddings, childbirths, whatever it is, Christmas. This is the stuff that you're bringing out to
Monday, just Monday, Tuesday. I don't know. Special occasion.
Man, listen, somebody should come out with just a Monday bourbon.
It's a great marketing play right there. I'm sure someone will grab it, And then I will say on topic of price, you look at some of the biggest brands out there, right? The most loved, cherished brands, what they actually sell their whiskey for. Again, sometimes there's a big disparity between what people mark it up to. They are very much keeping that price down, and you and I can think of more than one brand, but one brand comes to mind. And they do they try very hard, even on and they have super high end stuff to really keep that price very much down. Keep it, when you're producing that amount, you have the ability to. I'm obviously not coming in at that price point, but there is a big part to that industry, and that's one of the most loved brands in the industry. And I think that those two kind of go together.
Yeah. And to play on that though too, like, the consumers need to realize that they need to. I'm not saying our consumers are not educated, but they need to kind of be more cognizant of that. It's like, like say what you guys are doing are not. It's not what the big players are doing on a massive scale. Like you don't have 3 million barrels aging. You know what I'm saying? Like, I hope you get to that point one day, but it's just not what it is. It's just not. People need to understand that there's different. Like you said, there's different areas, different lanes, different niches of this whole whiskey bourbon process and it doesn't have to be what we call in Kentucky, and I don't know what you guys in New York do, but we call them taters. It doesn't have to be those taters, those tater bottles, which is coming from the beloved distilleries. It's just everybody what they're sought after on the secondary market, if you will. But again, like, what you guys are doing is something unique. It's something different. There is, like you mentioned, there's some other folks that are doing it too, but if you can afford it, be open to it. Like, get on, just try it. It's different, and it's really good.
And I went back through, and Brandon, I don't know about you, I actually like the 15 on when I went. I did all 3 of them like right in a row with a little drink of water in between. And that 15, it's fun. It's totally different than the other 2, which again blows my mind on how for 5 barrels that come out of the same batch, let the age a little bit longer. Now again, I know single barrels can be wildly different, but I'm guessing when you guys bought them, they weren't too far off from each other.
No.
and it is wild to see what happened over time.
Yes.
We only had limited, like we had limited like samples, but I wanted to try each of them with a drop of water. But for me, I always want to try it first off with. I just want to see what it is straight up. Hence neat and mixed. But mixed over here used to mix it with Coke, but he's now come a long way.
Hey, I didn't want to get yelled. I got tired of getting yelled at by everyone. But no, Carl, like this is really cool to see that different. Like I said, you guys had 5 barrels that, like I said, I'm sure as you said, they were very similar because single barrels can be wildly different. But man, to see how they have aged just from 11 to 14, a little more similar. Boy, 15, almost a totally different product.
It's also, first of all, thank you, and it's also scary how sometimes just even one barrel, depending on the season, very short periods of time could drastically change in taste profile. We just bottled a 50-year-old single grain Scotch last year, and we owned it for probably, I don't know if it's 5 years or so, the last 5 years of its lifetime, and especially towards the end, we're sampling it every 3 to 6 months just because you have no idea where that can fall off a cliff really quickly, and you want to make sure that doesn't. So, there's that's really what makes whiskey is the fact that there is no box to put it into. There's the lack of consistency is what gives it character, and it's what gives it the story.
And y'all got a fun one to share. Brandon, anything else?
I don't. I'm good. And thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to try this. Hope we can work together in the future.
I want to try
future releases
16
or whatever it is.
and 17 or
Yeah.
18, whatever those other numbers on these this has been fun.
It doesn't matter if we start on time or not. Like we'll get, it doesn't matter. We can just sit and hang out and have a few drinks. It's all good.
I am in Kentucky, more than typically twice a month. So we also would love to get together and show you what we're doing out there.
Absolutely.
And
I'm in.
We're in. Carl, this has been a blast, and thank you for sharing some really unique pours. This has been a pleasure.
My absolute pleasure. And I'll end off with saying, as a brand owner and someone that that does this, there's nothing better than when you give your whiskey to somebody, but to have differences of opinions and even a change in terms of what your opinion is, because that tells you that there's each whiskey can stand on its own. So I really do appreciate getting that feedback and having it vary. That nothing makes me happier than when it varies amongst people, because then if everyone likes one whiskey, that means the other ones aren't as good.
Yeah.
So I definitely love it. I definitely appreciate when getting good feedback and people have differences of opinion. I think that's really what makes the industry the way it is. So thank you for having me. It really has been awesome, and looking forward.
100%. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We appreciate you.